Warning. You are entering a restricted area. Return to where you came from, or be destroyed.
You're heading your way towards the useless nerdy knowledge. Please do not go any further. If you will not comply, you will hear a nerd rambling.
Nerd alert!
Get those nerds! 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 Nerds!
Exterminate!
Go ahead, make my day.
Bazinga!
I'll be back.
Greetings, fellow podcast listeners. My name is Ben, and I am the destroyer of all worlds. Well, if only I could be. So, today's topic is rather interesting today. This is about very confusing movie timelines. Now, whenever you're watching a series of movies that has, multiple sequels, there might occasionally be that one movie that just really confuses you, and you have no idea, if this is like a prequel, or if it's like a sequel, or where it takes place. You'll get really confused. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, like the many of the very confusing timelines in movie franchises and movie series, whatever. I'm not going to be talking about television movie timelines. Like, for example, Doctor Who. Like, I love Doctor Who, but the the timeline for that is like way off the charts. But apparently someone did make some sort of like chart for the series. I can provide a link in the description for the image, but when I look at it, it's just like a big holy crap. You don't know what to say about it, like right in your face, you know. It's just like this gigantic globe full of like lines and stuff. So I don't want to say it's like a mess because it looks accurate to me, but again, it's like you don't know where to begin with that. But yeah, I can provide a link in the description if you're listening to this on YouTube, and it's just like a big whole, like, what do you do with this, and how can an actual human being like create this? Like, I almost feel like maybe an AI created it, but I don't know really. I don't really know who made it or the backstory of it, but yeah. But something like that, I'm not going to be talking about that timeline because it's way too confusing. You can be your own judge for that, or you can figure that out yourself, I mean. Because there's like so many things to talk about of that, whether it's like, video games if there are any, or even like the comic books or regular books, the audio adventures of Doctor Who. There's a lot to unfold on that, so yeah, I'm not going to bother. Yeah, it's just like not exactly my area to talk about because there's like way too many, and there's even more for the future. So, yeah. So I'm just going to be talking about like different movie franchises, really. So to start off with, I might as well talk about the Terminator series. And again, there are huge spoilers ahead for any of these that you haven't seen. So if you haven't seen any of these, then just click off now. But if you have seen these, then keep listening, I guess. So with the Terminator franchise, obviously one of the most entertaining franchises of all time, supposedly. And obviously the first one takes place in the year 2029, and we still have a few years until that happens, where basically the artificially intelligent Skynet system created Terminators to basically wipe out all humanity. And eventually they learned that there was a resistance made to destroy Skynet and their Terminators. So they sent a Terminator back in time to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, because she would be the mother of the resistance leader, John Connor. So that makes pretty much a lot of sense to me. So it's like, starts off in 1984, I guess you would say. And then in the sequel, Terminator 2, even though it was released in 1991, it takes place in 1997. And basically the exact same thing happens. Two Terminators this time are sent back in time to kill John Connor when he was still a child. So that's actually pretty cool. So far this timeline is like first 1984 to 1997, and then supposedly later in the future to 2029. But then, of course, since Hollywood needs extra dough for their cash-grabbing hands, they did to make Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines. This movie was okay from what I saw, but it was not really my favorite. It is cool to see Schwarzenegger back again, but at the same time, it's just, I don't know. Lots of people would say that it's basically the exact same movie as Terminator 2, just slightly different or just not as memorable or entertaining. Like, there are some good things to it, like lots of car chase sequences and explosions, but it's basically the whole, we've seen this before, we've seen this all happen before type of deal. But anyway, so, basically a few years after Judgment Day, or Terminator 2, basically, and then eventually Judgment Day pretty much already happens after that. And that kind of ends the timeline right there for this one timeline here. So it goes Terminator, Terminator 2, and then Terminator 3. So then, with the next timeline, it would go Terminator, then Terminator 2, and then I believe, completely ignoring Terminator 3, would be Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles. Now, I've even looked up like different Terminator timelines to see if it included it. So far from what I've seen, it does not. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because it's a sadly forgotten TV series. I mean, heck, there's only 2 seasons of it. But, I mean, it has Summer Glau in it from Firefly. How could you not like that at all? But anyway, basically, this, from the couple episodes I've seen of Sarah Connor Chronicles, it takes place after, I want to say, maybe a few years after Terminator 2, because it gives some subtle hints of, like, Miles, who, I guess, like, kind of started Skynet, is kind of mentioned in there and all that. Of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger is not in there, but they still use the whole T-800 endoskeleton design or thing of that. And then, of course, Summer Glau is like a newly improved Terminator. But again, so there's that. And then after that, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the next one to come after the Sarah Connor Chronicles would be Terminator Salvation. Not really a movie that everyone likes because Schwarzenegger is not really in it. They have him in it at the end of the movie, but he's all CG, so it's technically not really him. So that's kind of where it kind of falls down for me, and I assume for lots of other people. Now, I believe that Terminator Salvation is the one movie that takes place in the future, but again, it's just like, I would have to agree with a friend I'm following on Twitter, where she says, there needs to be a Terminator movie that takes place in the actual future. And I actually wouldn't mind that, because we see mostly flashbacks or brief scenes of the whole future. And we don't really get a whole movie of that. I think that's what Salvation kind of was, except it was like the beginning of it or something. I'm not really sure. But yeah. So anyway, that would be like the second timeline for me. Like the first Terminator, second Terminator, Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles, both seasons, and then Terminator Salvation. I believe that's what that timeline would be. And for the next one, I think this one just stands on its own timeline. Just the one movie, which is Terminator Genesis, and Genesis with a Y instead of an I, which is weird, but whatever. I remember seeing this, like, the first, 15, 20, maybe even 30 minutes of the movie was actually not bad, but the rest of it really, really goes downhill. But yeah, this one, I believe, just, has its own timeline, because, I don't know, it's really confusing, especially time-wise. It's really confusing, so I think this movie just sits at its own timeline, where it's the only movie in its timeline, and nothing really else, really. Especially, with the cast of, replacing Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese. These people just do not look like it. Like, the one girl who played as Sarah Connor in this movie just did not have any traits or similarities to Linda Hamilton, especially how different she was supposed to be. I just didn't see it, and I didn't like it. So yeah, I don't like Genesis at all. I do like the beginning scenes, but the rest of it is just a big what for me, you know. And then the next one would be the next timeline would be the first Terminator, Terminator 2, and then after that, Terminator Dark Fate. I saw Terminator Dark Fate in the movie theater, and when I saw it, I thought it was actually pretty entertaining. But again, it was another one of those, we've already seen these car chase sequences, and we've kind of already seen this, and blah blah blah. Schwarzenegger wasn't really in a whole lot in it, which was, I guess, okay. Like, they wanted to have another one of those movies where it's like passing the torch. And lots of films were kind of doing that, which I don't mind. Like, the Star Wars sequel trilogy did that, where basically they're showing the old actors, but also passing the light to new actors that could carry on for the series. And I believe that Ghostbusters Afterlife, that's coming very soon, is doing kind of the same thing with, like, these kids, especially with the kid from Stranger Things. So we'll see about that. And Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai is doing the exact same thing with the Karate Kid franchise. Love that series, and they're kind of doing the exact same thing with that, where they're showing a new cast, but still showing the older cast the same way. But yeah, that's kind of my feel for this movie. But at the same time, the movie really was not that great for me. It really wasn't. Looking back on it, really. So anyway, it's like a whole different timeline is taking place where the whole Skynet Judgment Day didn't take place because, huge spoiler alert, at the beginning of Terminator Dark Fate, and I can definitely say I'm very impressed by the CGI and the motion capture to make them look young. It looked really impressive. And James Cameron actually came back to make this movie. But a huge spoiler alert that the T-800 Terminator came back and successfully killed John Connor. Now, at first I was like, what the hell? And it's literally like, to me, it's like you spat in the face of Terminator 2, which is one of the best movies ever made, and the best sequel ever made. And you just literally just spat in the face of like all that hard work and all that effort to save John Connor, and then it's like, nope, you're dead. But anyway, I guess you could say it's an interesting experiment to see what would happen, I guess. You know, what if? But we've already seen a what if. What if John Connor turned to Terminator? We know, a crappy movie. But anyway, so yeah, it kind of gives, instead of Skynet, it's like something else and shows completely different Terminators. But yeah, and then it's just weird after that, really. But anyway, it is cool to see Linda Hamilton back, and then supposedly Schwarzenegger for one last time. Like, that's cool and all. So yeah, it goes Terminator, Terminator 2, and then Terminator Dark Fate. But I still say that there needs to be RoboCop versus Terminator. You've done the same thing with like Alien versus Predator. You know, you've made the comic books, you've done the video games, and you have literally 2 sequels for Alien versus Predator. And the same thing with RoboCop versus Terminator. There are video games and comic books. Now there needs to be a movie. Like with all these crossover movies that's happening nowadays, there needs to be one. But anyway, so that's the Terminator franchise for me. And there's a lot. Now, speaking of which, I might as well talk about like the Alien and Predator movies. There's not a whole lot to say about them because the timelines are pretty tame, really. But I might as well get into them. So, with the first Alien movie, it took place in, or was released in 1979. Took place in 22 something. I don't remember exactly, but it's not important. So basically, you know, that's the first one to come, and then 15. No, not 15. I think it was like, oh geez, I want to say it was like 80-something years later. Ripley was like, you know, traveling in space for like 80-something years. No, I think that's wrong. But basically for a long time, and then realizes that her daughter passed away after being in space for so long. And then it would be Alien 3, and then many years after Alien 3 would be Alien Resurrection, and supposedly that's where that timeline ends. And then it would, and then there was like 2 other Alien movies that Ridley Scott directed. Supposedly, Prometheus is a prequel to Alien, and then after that was Alien Covenant. So, if you're watching them in chronological order, and by that I mean like when they were released in theaters, you might be a bit confused, or they might actually be subtle and explain like what year it takes place in. Then you'll be like, oh, okay, so this is a prequel. But again, if you're that kind of person who doesn't pay attention, or if they don't give direct hints and you might be a bit confused, Well, that's what I'm here to explain. So basically, the Alien timeline right here goes, so far, Prometheus, and then Alien Covenant, and then the first Alien, and then if you want to include it, you can include Alien Isolation on the, which is a video game, and a really good one at that. I've played it on the PlayStation 4. It's terrifying to play. But anyway, so there's that, and then Alien 3, and then Alien Resurrection. Or no, Aliens, then Alien 3, and then Alien Resurrection. So yeah, Alien Isolation is like between Alien and Aliens. And then with the whole Alien vs. Predator, the two movies for that, the duology, that's its own timeline. Basically, from what I've heard, it's non-canon to each franchise, both Alien and Predator. And with the Predator series, there's not like a whole lot to say really. It's just Predator, Predator 2, supposedly Predators, and then The Predator. Stupid title, by the way, but whatever. It's like Suicide Squad, and then The Suicide Squad. Whatever. Now for Predators, I can't really say when that would take place. I assume in the same year it was released in theaters, but we don't know really. We don't really know anything about like when that movie really takes place. But it was still good to watch though. But anyway, moving aside from that, next we have another thing. I'm not really going to talk about like the X-Men movies. That is a confusing timeline, especially when they like change the actors and all that. I'm not going to even bother with that. If you want to do that, go ahead. But the same thing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There are like tons of different prequels and all that, and all the TV shows and all that. I'm not going to get into that. Like, I love the MCU, but I feel like that they've gotten out of control ever since Endgame. Like, they've gotten like bonkers. And then, of course, like with the Saw franchise, I've heard that has a confusing timeline. I'm not going to bother with that. The same thing with Highlander. I've heard that has a confusing timeline. I'm not going to get into that either. Next, I'm going to get into like Planet of the Apes, the Planet of the Apes franchise. Now, for those of you who haven't seen it, there are huge spoilers ahead, so just, well, you were warned if you haven't seen it. So, with the first one released in 1968, absolute classic. And then the sequel after that, which I would definitely say one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, absolutely terrible, but takes place after the first Planet of the Apes. And then supposedly, the next movie, which is Escape from the Planet of the Apes, which was a lot better than the last one, basically takes place back in normal Earth, present day, I believe from the 70s, early 70s, I want to say. And but it's still like a sequel to like years in the future, and then after that it takes the next couple movies like War 4, or no, not War 4. It's like Battle 4, and then good grief, what the heck was the name of that movie? It is Conquest. After Escape, it's Conquest, and then Battle for the Planet of the Apes, and that's supposedly the end of that timeline. And then there's like the TV series, and then the animated series, Return of the Planet of the Apes. I assume that's part of the same timeline, but I wouldn't exactly say... Well, actually, no. From what I've heard, that the TV series has its own timeline. Has the same characters from the first movie, but it's not part of the same timeline. The animated series, I don't know where that fits. And then there's Tim Burton's remake of it, which has its own timeline. And then there's the really good and well-done Planet of the Apes prequel trilogy, with Andy Serkis doing the motion capture for Caesar, which is great. He's a great actor. I assume that this prequel trilogy, well, is a prequel to the original Planet of the Apes movie series. But I cannot really confirm exactly if it is, or if it's just like its own prequel story or whatever. Like, I assume it is, but I'm not really sure. If it is, let me know. Next, I'll just get into the horror franchise, which is definitely where those timelines might be confusing. Like, as I mentioned, the Saw series has a confusing timeline from what I've read, but again, I'm not going to get into it because the Saw series really isn't my type of thing. I've seen the first one, which is actually well done, has a good ending, but the rest of them are just not for me. The first one was fine because it was more of the theater of the mind type of thing. But for the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was actually Really strange, but well done in a way. Just terrifying. The second one was more of a self-aware humor type of thing, which is interesting. And then it's like the third one, Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, and then the fourth one, which is The Next Generation. Really stupid. Both, well, 3 and 4 are really, really stupid. Basically, it's just those first 4 movies that's part of its own timeline. And then it's the remake after that, and then the prequel for that remake, which has its own timeline. And then there's the first Texas Chainsaw in the next timeline, and then Texas Chainsaw, or Texas Chainsaw 3D, if you want to call that. And then that takes place immediately after the first movie. So that's part of its own timeline. And then there's Leatherface, where it's, I believe, a prequel to the first movie. And that's all I know, really. I've only seen, like, the first 2 movies, and I really like those. I tried sitting through 3 and 4, and I just couldn't. And I was just like, well, this is what the rest of the series are like. I'm not even going to bother, because these series, even though I have all the DVDs to them, just don't speak out to me as all the other ones do. So next we have the Halloween franchise. This is definitely where the timelines for these movies get a bit of a mess. So if you have like no idea, or if you have like no internet at all, or if you haven't like done your research on them, you'll be a bit confused with these. So it takes place right here on the first Halloween movie in 1978, and then even though Halloween 2 was released in 1981, it still takes place on the exact same night of 1978. And then, of course, with Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, that's pretty much its own timeline because Michael Myers is not in that movie at all. So yeah, Halloween 3 is its own timeline. But anyway, digressing that, next would be Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, and then Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, which is the 6th movie in the Halloween franchise. So yes, it would go Halloween 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. And that would be the end of that timeline, including the supposed Thorn trilogy, which is really stupid, honestly. Next would be, after that would be Halloween H20, 20 years later. Now, I understand when you see it a lot, it says H2O. It has nothing to do with water, I assure you. It just means H20 as in 20 years later. Halloween 20 years later. Stupid title, but whatever. So yeah, then it goes, for this timeline, it goes Halloween 1, Halloween 2, Halloween H20, and then the movie that came after that, Halloween Resurrection. Absolutely dumb movie. Hate it. And that ends that timeline right there for anyone who might be confused for that. And then we have Rob Zombie's Duology. And now the first Rob Zombie Halloween remake is a bit dark, but honestly I thought was pretty well done. It was okay. Not great, obviously, but it was okay. It was an okay attempt. But the sequel for that, oh my goodness, that is just an absolute mess. Like, I don't even know like what to say about that, but that's just a mess. That's all I'm going to say. So yeah, those 2 movies have its own timeline. And then with the recent Halloween movie that came out in 2018, that was literally just called Halloween, takes place 40 years after the first Halloween movie, ignoring all of the other movies. Now, I'm fine with that. But couldn't you just make a title that makes it very distinguishable from the last movie if it's going to be a sequel to the first? Why would you just call it Halloween? It's literally like Halloween, Halloween. Like, that doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, but can't you just give it some sort of subtitle? I mean, give it, like, Answer the Call or something like that to make it more distinguishable, for crying out loud. But anyway, so for this timeline, it would go Halloween, Halloween 2018, as many people, including me, call it. And then with the new Halloween movie coming out this year, Halloween Kills, which I cannot wait to see. And then Halloween Ends, which will either come next year or maybe in a couple of years. We'll see. So that's the Halloween franchise right there. And then the Friday the 13th franchise seems to be pretty alright, but of course there's just kind of a mix-up in there. So it goes Halloween. It's hard to, yeah. But anyway, so it goes Friday the 13th 1 all the way through Part 8. And then there's Jason Goes to Hell, the Final Friday, which of course we all know was never the final Friday. And then Jason X, and then Freddy vs. Jason. And now I know what you're thinking, like, wait, what? Huge spoiler alert, by the way. At the end of Jason Goes to Hell, there's an ending where Freddy Krueger comes out of the ground and grabs Jason's mask. Now, this movie was released in 1993, so we had to wait about 10 years until Freddy vs. Jason came out, so Freddy vs. Jason came out in 2003, but the movie that came a year before that was Jason X, where he was in outer space in the future. Now that's confusing already. So technically the timeline says that after Jason Goes to Hell, Freddy vs. Jason came next, and then a few years after that, then Jason X came. So technically it's like a big swap, but for the 10th Jason movie they had to do something. But whatever. And the same thing kind of goes for like the Nightmare on Elm Street series, where it's like Nightmare 1 all the way to Part 6. And then there's kind of like two different timelines where the ending would be, the last of the first timeline would be Wes Craven's New Nightmare, only because Freddy Krueger is an actual fictional character, and the real-life Freddy Krueger tries to come into our real world. It's well done, really. And then the second timeline would ignore Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and just after that, after Part 6 would be Freddy vs. Jason. And then, of course, there's like the remakes, which have its own timeline. But anyway, then after that would be the Puppet Master franchise. Oh wait, hold on. I actually forgot to mention that Ridley Scott, the director of Alien and Blade Runner, confirmed that Blade Runner is takes place in the same universe as the Alien franchise. So if you want to include Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 in the Alien series, then you can. So I guess it would go like Blade Runner 2049, and then Prometheus, and then Alien Covenant, and so on. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Sorry about that. So then anyway, next we have the Puppet Master franchise. Now, surprisingly, I have seen this timeline a couple of times on different websites, basically. So, like the first Puppet Master takes place in like 1941, of like when the Puppet Master killed himself to basically hide his secret. And then supposedly in the present day of like 1988 or 1989, whenever the first movie takes place. And then there's like the sequel, which is like, I assume, a year later. Now, I forgot to mention, if you're not familiar with the Puppet Master franchise, it's a direct-to-video horror series that Full Moon Studios created. So if you're not familiar with it, that's why. They were direct-to-videos, and they're still going on to this day, surprisingly. So anyway, and then it goes like Puppet Master 2, but then Puppet Master 3 is a prequel to the first one, and then after that is Puppet Master 4, and then Puppet Master 5, and then Puppet Master 6, which are still sequels after Puppet Master 2. And then after that is, Curse of Puppet Master, which is like the 6th one, supposedly is after that, but then after that movie is Retro Puppet Master, which is yet another prequel. Basically, this is definitely where it all started, so you could definitely say that. Basically where Andre Toulon, the creator of the puppets, basically how he created these puppets from like the very early 1900s. And after that was Puppet Master: The Legacy. I assume that takes place after the 6th movie, but that movie was just so bad that it doesn't even need to be worth talking about. It's literally just a clip show movie. It sucks. And then there's the Axis trilogy, where it's like Axis of Evil, Axis Rising, and Axis Termination, where I believe it's another prequel where it's between the first Puppet Master movie's beginning scene and then that movie, I believe. And then I believe also after the Axis trilogy would be Blade the Iron Cross. And then there's also like the remake, which is Puppet Master Lilith's Reich, which I've seen. Do not like. It's just way too gory for me. And then there's also like the crossover with Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys. Demonic Toys has its own franchise thing, but it's like its own timeline, which is confusing enough, I guess. And then, of course, I guess lastly to talk about, there is the Godzilla movies, of course. I didn't even think about that until I saw it on a website where it's like, oh yeah, the Godzilla franchise has a confusing timeline as well. There's like so many movies where they ignore the movies that came after before it on like one certain movie, where it only remembers like the very first movie. So I guess if you want to get technical, and if you want to include different kaiju movies from the Toho universe, you can. Like, you can include Frankenstein Conquers the World, and then War of the Gargantuas, and Mothra and Varan in with like the original Showa era movies of Godzilla, then you can. So basically it would go like the first Godzilla movie all the way to the end of the Showa era series where Terror of Mechagodzilla would take place. I'm not going to say all the Godzilla movies because I'm going to run out of breath if I bring up all of them, or if I say all their titles. So basically that's like that. And then in Godzilla 1984, it's basically a sequel to the first Godzilla movie, ignoring all the other movies that came before it. And then it would go all the way from that to Godzilla vs. Destroy in 1995. And then that would end that timeline. And then would come after supposedly after the first Godzilla movie from 1954 would be Godzilla 2000. Oh yeah, and the 1998 Godzilla movie, I guess, has its own timeline, but sometimes it kind of comes in towards the Millennium series or something like that. I don't really know. And then Godzilla vs. Megaguirus has like its own timeline from what I've heard. Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, or GMK as it's known as, also takes place after the first Godzilla movie. And then, of course, we have Godzilla against Mechagodzilla with the sequel Godzilla Tokyo SOS that takes place after the first Godzilla movie. And then, supposedly, one more time, including maybe a few other movies, after the first Godzilla movie, then comes Godzilla Final Wars. And then there's also Shin Godzilla, which has its own timeline, I believe. And then, of course, the MonsterVerse movies seem to be pretty okay, where if you want, the first in the MonsterVerse timeline would be Kong Skull Island, and then the 2014 Godzilla movie, and then King of the Monsters, and then Godzilla vs. Kong. So that's basically a whole rundown of all the different timelines that I can really think of for the moment. I know I only talked about, like, basically just the movie titles and like when they take place, but honestly that was kind of what I wanted to talk about for this subject. If there's any more timelines that you would want me to talk about, or any others that I might have missed talking about, or anything like that, I'm sorry. It's just that, there's a lot to unfold. It's just that movie timelines are very confusing. If they're done right, then that's great. They have a lot going out for whoever's writing the story. It's just really complicated for them to do something like that, It's just that, it takes a lot of writing, takes a lot of thinking, takes a lot of work to have that done, But if you manage to do it well enough and make it work, then that's great, because that's kind of what everyone needs to do, is basically make that work out. But if you make it so confusing you don't know when it takes place, then it doesn't deserve to be made then, because it takes a lot of work to do certain things, but you need to do as much as you could to make it well done. Because if it's not subtle enough, or if it doesn't like show itself at all, and you need to literally research it in order to be like, well, I don't get this confuses me, then you need to work more into that, really. So anyway, that was kind of my topic for today, just basically talking about the movie timelines. I'm thinking maybe I'll talk about something completely different next time. But that was kind of what I wanted to talk about how confusing timelines in different movies can be. So hopefully you enjoyed this or got something out of this, and I will see you next time on Useless Nerdy Knowledge. Thanks for listening.